Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Vince and I will be discussing what we learned from this year's admissions decisions before we discuss an article in part 2 that appeared in the New York Times entitled, Elite College Admissions Have Turned Students into Brands. For a question from a listener, Julie and I will discuss a question from Jennifer from Texas, and she wants to know, if a college has had a lot of racial incidents, who do you talk to find out what's really going on? And how do you know whether to take it off your students' list or give the school credit if the administration is handling the incidents well? We'll have the final part of our interview with Lydia Dagenet on law school admissions, and we'll have the final part of Kevin Newton Spotlight on the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. Friends, I'm here with Vince Garcia. Excited to be back with you, Vince. How are you, my friend?
Well, it's so exciting, by the time your listeners will hear this, but they'll be, visiting colleges and excited about their options, maybe pursuing the wait list here and there.
Well, let me tell you, this is you and I are recording this on a Monday. This goes live on Thursday. So this will be, this is going to go, yeah.
Okay.
I just slipped this one in under the deadline.
Oh, you're going to get it raw then. It just came out. So Ivy Day was last Thursday, and, we get to see the landscape, and it's the last ones, Ivy, Stanford, Berkeley, Michigan, they all, I don't know why, but they wait till the last 2 days.
So any lessons learned from looking at your decisions? And Julie and I are doing a session on that later too, but we all have different experiences, and love to know if there's anything you learn. Like we're always doing that, right? We're looking at schools and noticing maybe how they may have changed from years before in any way, shape, or form. Any observations that you can share with our listeners?
Yeah, I think for the University of California, they've been saying it for many years, at least 5, but I'm telling you, there are more majors than 5. And if you apply in the 5, you better start to walk on some water somehow.
Yeah, because I remember them releasing their data. Like so many people apply to the 5. It's a high number. What do you want to tell our listeners what those are?
So computer science, engineering, economics, psychology, communications. Those are their most popular major. Biology is going to be in there too. So I always tell students, look beyond. It's okay for you to be undecided and to check, an undecided social science box, be more general. You have to apply broadly. I think in terms of, Ivy Day, we did great, across the board. The only ones I didn't have students get into were MIT and Princeton, but everybody else, gave us some love. So I think the hard part is that you're starting to see this really minute competition in the range between probably 8% and 3% brown. and so what the distinction in that group is really, there's nothing I think a student can do to really sort of move the dial. But I think at that point, have you really done the things to make sure that you stay competitive in a regular pool? But I will say, University of California, I think it was somebody went to a WACAC conference recently, and it was like 12,000 applications for 9 or 200 spots in engineering. So when you're in that pool and you say engineering, you really should have done something really significant, and it needs to be significant in not necessarily just engineering, but as you said earlier, um, Mark, character really can make a difference. And I'll let you tell that story, but um, I think one other thing that is heartening as well is that I had a lot of success at Berkeley this year, and I think that's really due to the care and the careful reading. Like, I really am sort of amazed at the difference in the outcome for a student who applies to Berkeley. And I, take my hats off to that crew up there. I've read for them before, but they really are looking for a match and people who are going to make a difference. And I feel like they really look at everything.
Well, Femi has been over that office now. This would be his fourth cycle. I want to say he left Stanford right after 2019. So 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24. This is his fifth cycle, I think. And, he's been at a lot of places, not just Stanford. He was at Cornell. He was at Ithaca. He was at Delaware. He's been a lot of places.
Yeah.
He's probably putting his imprimatur on it. And I know he brings good people over there. He had Abby Jones, who's no longer there, but I see the caliber of the people that he brings in. So it doesn't surprise me. But I'll tell you, I notice and I'm really happy with how our kids did, but I think that our kids also, most of them listen. And if they listen, then they'll have realistic expectations for who they are. They don't necessarily come in with those realistic expectations. But I did notice the UCs, overall, they felt harder to me for out-of-state kids.
And they were.
Yeah, I felt it. I felt Irvine was harder for out-of-state kids. I felt San Diego was harder for out-of-state kids. I would say Berkeley and UCLA too. And Santa Barbara, I felt was harder than I've used to see some kids get in. Santa Barbara didn't get in as much this year. That's just on the UCs. So I noticed a lot of different trends with different schools. Some of them a couple felt a bit easier.
Oh.
Not talking about UCs. I'm not talking about UCs.
Okay. Yeah.
And some of them you can see, boy, when schools have leadership changes, especially in that admission office, when you get into year 2, sometimes even in year 1, when Whitney Soul took over for Eric Furta for UPenn, I saw changes immediately. Alumni were not getting in like they were before. And I can also feel Penn selectivity has increased. I can feel it in decisions, and it bears out in the numbers. But when there's a new general in charge, they start to put some of their own policies. And, of course, it depends. Especially true, I find it more true for private than for public. It's public, there's a lot of other things. And also it depends, as the faculty have say in the decisions. But, Vince and I were talking before we came on. Sean is over at Tulane, and we see some changes in Tulane. He's had a chance to put his imprimatur on there a little bit. I noticed big changes in Richmond from when Gil left, how they're using early action differently. Yeah, that's one thing I always look at when there's a leadership change. Yeah, can't rely too much on past results from what you've seen in the past. Any schools that you noticed that felt like they got harder?
For sure, Duke and Vanderbilt. It is.
Yeah, I would agree. Vince and I were talking off air about this before. Both of them.
Yeah, both of them. So if you have Christoph, not giving numerical values to testing and essays, I think what's really challenging is that they were very conservative I felt, in early decision. And then, so I hoped that they would be a little bit broader coming out of that. And I felt like they just really just like, we have our people. I think you see more admits from North Carolina and South Carolina.
Well, they had an initiative there. But, I was thinking about this earlier. This is just my experience. I can count the schools that I find harder to get in than Duke on one hand now. One hand. For me, it's just MIT, Stanford, Harvard, and maybe Caltech. And that's it. After that, I would say Duke and Brown for me are like the next, well, Princeton, Yale. Sorry, I got to put them. To me, they're almost like Princeton, Yale level now. Honestly, we had multiple kids get in Princeton that didn't get in Duke this year, like multiple. So to me, Princeton, Yale, Duke, Brown, they all feel at that level kind of to me now, where before I felt like Duke or Brown were like a different, like a notch down. We're just talking about the highest levels.
Right. For me, it would be Princeton, MIT is just a hard nut to crack. Certainly all of the other ones you mentioned, I feel strong contenders coming from Duke and Cornell, and Duke and Cornell, Vanderbilt, even Chicago is really more becoming, I think, really, really selective because.
I noticed a difference with Chicago this year.
Mm-hmm.
Kids, I think they would take an ED1 before they didn't take, that then got in super selective ED2 schools.
And UCLA is just in a different category. I mean, it's
UCLA is tough. I think we only have one kid in UCLA. UCLA is really tough. I think UCLA, I was thinking about this. UNC is the hardest school out of state to get into, any public, in my opinion. I feel very strongly about that.
I agree.
But I would say for an in-state, I can't think of any public harder than UCLA for like super, super strong in-state kids.
Yeah.
Now, I know you've had a lot of success with Berkeley, but to me, Berkeley's up there too. I find Berkeley is a tough, like, I'll see strong. I was telling Vince earlier today, I was a kid in at Stanford that didn't get in Berkeley.
Wow.
California, in-state California kid.
That happened to me 2 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I find Berkeley is a tough in-state admit too. For me, the hardest public in-states, I would say UCLA, Berkeley. Some of the Texas programs are tough, for like McCombs, the business school, even for Texas residents, really, really tough.
Yeah.
Certain majors for Georgia Tech in-state are brutal, like aerospace, biomedical, comp sci, mechanical engineering.
Michigan, brutal. Ross and engineering, hard.
Yes, but overall for Michigan, we actually see quite a few kids get in. But when you go Ross and engineering, that's when it gets really hard.
Yeah, I agree. For me, it would be UNC, UVA, UCLA.
Yeah, UVA is absolutely in the conversation. Thanks for reminding me about them. UVA out of state is really, really tough. In fact, what I noticed, UVA's gotten a lot tougher from Nova, Northern Virginia. Unlike UNC, they're a little different. I've talked to the leadership. UNC actually doesn't feel compelled to have to take like more kids from the rural parts of the state. They actually told me that they have a special connection to their local immediate area. If anything, it's an advantage. Now, talk to the people in that area, they don't feel that way because they still want you to be really high up in your class standing, and there's a lot of high-powered people there. But when you talk to Greg Roberts, I found on the podcast, like they feel a responsibility to go to the Roanoke's and the Harrisonburgs and places like that and take more kids. Like they just sort of feel that. Same for Georgia. They feel, Georgia's got an initiative, valedictorians, salutatorians automatically get in, Georgia and Georgia Tech. I felt Georgia was a little easier for me this year. Now, they expanded. They added, like, I think 200 people to the freshman class, and I noticed it. I saw more kids getting in there than you felt the same thing, Vince?
Amen. I
noticed that expansion.
I was so excited, to this. I only had 2 apply. One of them I thought it wasn't going to happen, and they're excited. It's between UGA and San Luis Obispo.
By the way, San Luis Obispo for comp sci is a tough admit, and same for some engineerings. I see some really, really strong kids that don't get in there for those areas.
That's their strongest area.
California. I'm talking about California kids.
No, I know who you're talking about. That's their hardest majors. Engineering.
Sheesh, if anybody thinks it's a CSU, No, that place is not a joke. My goodness.
No.
But I have also seen some kids for some alternative majors get in that were not like precipitously not as strong. Out of state. Well, I know they're not as strict as the UCs on the strict in-state restrictions that the UCs have. But major is huge at that school. When you say that's my experience.
College and major is number one.
Yeah, I can't even. It's shocking who I've seen get in for certain majors there versus who I've seen not get in other majors that were just ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah.
By the way, San Diego feels like it's getting tougher.
Not if you're from out of state. Hint, hint.
Well, they still have that 18% thing that they have to adhere to. Like the UCLA, San Diego, and Berkeley are the three ones that are strict on the 18%.
Yeah, but CSU is a different system with different rules.
No, I'm not talking about CSU. I'm talking about UC San Diego.
Oh, UC San Diego?
Yes.
Absolutely harder to get into.
Yeah, I was shocked that you were disagreeing with me. I'm like, Vince, what's the magic you got going on? So that clears up everything. You're talking about San Diego State. No, San Diego State will grab those out-of-state kids.
Yeah.
As
long as it's actually a lot of them, because they want the dollars and they don't have limitations like the UCs. But San Diego, their applicant pool just grew so much because everyone was jumping off the pedestal of the first three. They still apply to the top three, but San Diego just really came up like gangbusters, and they were much more selective.
So San Diego or Irvine, do you find one more selective than the other?
This year, San Diego. Last year, Irvine.
Irvine got tough this year. I saw a number of kids who I felt last year would have got in Irvine that didn't get in Irvine this year. You know who I noticed is easier? George Washington. I'm seeing George Washington throw presidential offers at, kids with modest transcripts.
Interesting.
Now, their presidential is $25K. So it's not like, full tuition or something. And they give a lot of them away. But I'm seeing a lot of kids get presidentials at George Washington.
That's great. Good for them.
Anyone else that stuff feels a little easier? Because I don't want to discourage people here. That I'm thinking of we're talking about how hard it is get in Vanderbilt and Duke and UVA and UNC and Texas and,
I would say University of Georgia and University of Washington.
Yeah, kids did well at Washington. You know what else I was really pleased who got in? Now, we'll see about this year. NC State going to the Final Four for men and women. Men and women.
Goodbye, Duke. Bye.
Yes. You and I both.
Bye.
That was a fun game.
Bye, Christoph.
That was a fun game.
It was a great game.
He doesn't hear this one. So, yeah. So here's the thing. I saw a lot of kids get in NC State and Maryland, as long as they avoid Comp Sci.
Really?
As long as they avoid Comp Sci Comp Sci is brutal at Maryland, but Maryland and NC State consistently took lots of kids, good kids, but kids with 3.7, 3.8 unweighted.
That's great.
Kind of things. But UVA, shoosh, even Northern Virginia, the kid gets in there. I agree with you. I think we agree. So you would say UCLA in-state, UCLA, UVA, UNC, Texas,
up and down. You never know what they're going to do.
Well, major plays such a big deal there.
Yes.
But that 6% auto admit gobbles up so many spots. The kids at Highland Park High School do well there, even when they're not top 6%. Those places are tough in-state. I think Wisconsin's going to get a lot tougher, too. They've got the new 5% mandatory auto admit going into effect. And I think that's going to make it tough. I notice it can be tough there for Illinois, especially for business.
Interesting.
I think they just got so many Illinois kids. Illinois business engineering comp sci, I find is tough for Wisconsin.
Wisconsin loves LA, and I love Wisconsin because they love LA.
Yeah.
It's a good place. But you're right. UNC, UVA, when child says that and they're not from those states, I said, well, I guess you're going to need to fly because.
But I'm going to tell you something. They turned down strong kids from the state. Now, I'll tell you what's tough. Georgia Tech in-state.
Mm-hmm.
We had multiple kids get in Michigan out of state and from Georgia that didn't get in Georgia Tech in-state.
Wow. Oof, rough.
Yeah, multiple kids. So Georgia Tech is tough in-state. But once again, it's probably a lot like Berkeley and UCLA, where it's kind of major. It's a lot of major. It's very major related too. But the problem with Tech is they only have like 35 majors. So they don't have a lot of backdoor majors.
Mm-mm.
And most people that want to go there, they typically do want to go there for engineering or computer science. Business is competitive.
Mm.
Georgia Tech has gotten tough. Do you have a lot of experience with them?
I have, and it's been very good, but I'll have a student who went to Brown and Stanford. They applied to Georgia Tech.
Yeah, it's that kid.
Yeah. So my the students I have, because I know the bar is so high, they have to be, that's a school that's really popular with that group. Like they feel like, wow, I'd be lucky to have that option. So,
you know who else I felt got a bit tougher? I noticed both Florida and Florida State.
I don't have anyone to apply to them. Mm-mm.
Yeah, because of DeSantis stuff going on down there. I got a range of kids.
No, well, some of it's that, but you know what it is? They want a test score.
Yeah, but a lot of your kids test well.
Yeah, but if I have kids with a test score, they're going to apply to Northwestern. You know who got tough? Northwestern, Vanderbilt, Duke. Boom.
See, to me, Northwestern was noticeably easier this year. Vanderbilt was noticeably harder. Vanderbilt was killing me. Absolutely. And it's not just me. Like, I had counselors all over the country. Yeah. I was talking to one in New Jersey who was saying, we just tell our kids not to apply there anymore. Mm-hmm. That's how bad it's gotten. There's something going on with Vanderbilt. Like, I think like they're being, like, to me, they're being strategic. You know how sometimes schools want to get that message out there. Mm-hmm. They want that. They want it to be known. And they're doing some, I can't completely put my finger on it. I know a couple things because they shared a few. They're taking more deferred kids. You apply ED, defer you, and then they take you. They also said they're giving a lot more merit scholarship money. But man, I saw some strong kids not get into Vanderbilt. Like multiple kids that got in Ivies not get Vanderbilt.
Yeah. Oh, me
too. I'm talking about Princeton. Mm-hmm. It's weird how you and I can have similar experiences on almost all schools, but then there'll be like one school where it's different, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you find Princeton harder than Harvard, don't you? I don't, not at all. Harvard is noticeably harder to me than Yale or Princeton. Noticeably harder.
This year I had 3.
I think our last six kids that have gotten into Princeton, and that's not this year, that's over the last 3 years. I don't think a single one got into Harvard. Now, they didn't all apply. It's just, it's interesting.
Yeah, this year I had 3 got into Harvard, Princeton.
That's good.
I can't. I knock on that door, but none of them will apply early. None of them. So that's part of the deal, I think. I think if some of those.
Some of it.
But if you can get into Harvard and Stanford, I think Princeton should look at you.
I mean, once again, institutional priorities, kids looking for schools, looking for different things.
Yeah.
Who else? I want to see if we can share a couple more positive ones for people. I feel like we're talking about all these super hard to get in schools, which I know a lot of people are curious about. If they're not interested for themselves, they're curious.
I think that the positives that I saw, I'm seeing a lot of really good merit coming out of SMU and TCU. I'm seeing
they've had that for a while.
And Indiana. This past week I was on a tour of Boston schools and New York schools. I have to say, if you're looking for more males on campus, go to Babson and Bentley and Pace, because I didn't know where I was. I thought I was at all male school. It was amazing and so diverse. Bentley, I was like, where'd you come? You came out of the the visit was good. The kids were great. I love their tour because you walk by so many classrooms and you could see who's in the classroom. Their Bloomberg room, 30 desks. I mean, so impressive. So if you're a B student and you're looking to to, do business and you want to be at a school where there's more guys, go to Bentley and Pace.
Yeah, Bryant's another good one for that in the Rhode Island. Really, really good business, really good entrepreneurship. I mean, they get the results. You have to be comfortable with. Maybe a lot of people haven't heard of the school, not everybody's comfortable with that, but
Mm-hmm.
the results are good. I'm trying to just think of a couple more that weren't, that maybe weren't. The trend line looks a little easier than it had been. I'm just trying to think if anyone comes to mind.
I think Ohio State for me and Wisconsin were great. And I saw some
I noticed
openness.
for William and Mary, I'm seeing more kids get William and Mary if they go overseas for a semester, Seville. They go to Seville, then they get William and Mary. I've been quite pleased with that. Villanova, mixed reviews on them. Sometimes I'll have a kid get in, like one got in Michigan, didn't get in Villanova, but then another one gets in Villanova, doesn't get in Penn State.
Mm-hmm. One thing I would say, another trend has got to
Mm-hmm.
be the offer of go abroad admit
Yes. Isn't that up?
everywhere, every
I mean,
school,
yeah, I think people are looking at Northeastern and taking a page from them.
every school, BU, LMU. I mean, schools who've never done it before, out of the blue.
But to be honest with you, it's pretty smart because, like, all these schools are looking for ways to get revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've got a completely admissible applicant and you don't have spots for them,
Yes.
and then also they're probably going to come back with a better perspective, a global worldview,
Yes.
a little more mature. And then you made your work that much easier for building your class out. Yeah, that is really, really up.
That is a big
really
trend.
up.
That is a
and
trend.
I don't think that's going to stop either.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
I mean, there's a lot of schools that I could mention that are, we see a high percentage of kids get in and they get money, but it's not really like a new trend, right? Like schools like Loyola in Chicago.
Yeah.
Kids get great packages out of there. Redlands, I see great packages out of Redlands. And my kids like Redlands when they come from over. I think they're going to yield a kid this year one from New York, one from Oklahoma. I mean, they're like winning kids 1,000. They got a Georgia kid from me last year.
Wow.
I mean, those are people that are skipping over like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of schools. Any schools that you notice people have good visits on like that? I like Redlands is one for me. Syracuse is another one.
Yeah, Syracuse wins a lot of people over.
Yeah, they really do. People they have a good visit there.
I would say that, during my past, my most recent visits, I have to say I was so impressed with Northeastern. It just keeps getting stronger and stronger, like that neighborhood and the way they run their tours and their presentations are BC like, where they have, the admissions officer and the students. And although I would say one of the other trends I noticed in my school visits was they don't take any questions from the audience. None. They run it so fast and hard. They don't want to hear, oh, if you go to, London at Northeastern and you want to come back, there's no housing for you.
You know what, Vince? I'm really loving this, but we're half an hour in. I let it run because I think our listeners would like it. But you've got a tip. Share your tip, and let's get into this article.
So the tip, you know me, Mark,
Mm-hmm.
I always have a tip for 12th, 11th, and 10th.
Yes, which is good because we have different audiences at different stages. So you're thinking the way, and I love that.
So my 12th grade tip is, please, this year, if you applied for financial aid, know your enrollment deadline. Please.
Mm-hmm.
Write it down, put it on the fridge, make sure your parents, because that FAFSA, you don't know when you're going to get a package.
Yeah, there's schools ticking to May 1. There's schools doing May 15th. There's schools doing June 1. And I'm sure it's going to get pushed beyond that.
Yeah. So if the school you applied to only did FAFSA, know your deadline, deposit deadline. In 11th grade, this year, I will say, I feel, I had a very, really solid, strong student, African-American, really high testing, but just, we couldn't they just could not get the demonstrated interest done. So I think a lot of schools, I would say, Mr. Waitlist. So as a junior, you're sitting at home wondering what to do during spring break. Please jump on the virtual information and connect to these schools, because I think they're still looking. They're looking. Are you opening your email? So I would say for juniors, do not don't neglect connecting to these schools, because somebody may say to you, your BU is your likely, but if you don't show them any interest, they'll deny you.
At least waitlist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then 10th grade, this is the time where you figure out your testing plan. You're about to finish. You're about to finish, geometry. Maybe you're in, algebra 2, and you want to take some practice tests. If you didn't take the PSAT or the PACT, by the summer, you want to know, if I'm going to prep, which one am I going to do? So I always, with all my students who are sophomores, we have a testing plan by the end of sophomore year. So those are my tips.
The only exception I have to that, Vince, is I want kids to have had Algebra 2 or at least be through one semester of Algebra 2.
Right.
So, now most kids are, but not every kid is. If math's not their thing, or if they're at a school that does Algebra 1, geometry, Algebra 2, and they weren't a kid that did Algebra 1 in 8th grade. That's the only thing, because otherwise you're just going to get killed on that test if you don't have Algebra 2. Now, I've changed a little on that. I used to say through Algebra 2. Now I'm like at least through one semester. At least be through one semester. But like you, I'm working on the testing plan at the end of 10th. Good stuff.
All right.
So admissions vernacular is DSAT. That's what some people are now calling the digital SAT, the DSAT.
I love DSAT. That. DSAT. Yep. Okay, got it.
DSAT. Pretty, and the big number is $1 billion. So the second biggest gift to a college ever occurred. Dr. Ruth Gottsman, I might have said it wrong here, sorry. Former professor at Albert Einstein Medical College. You're like, what's a former professor given $1 billion? Well, she's the widow of a Wall Street investor, and she's given $1 billion to the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx to basically make it tuition free. So 93-year-old. So that money just grew. Yep. 93-year-old widow of a major Wall Street investor gave $1 billion. That broke, pretty recently here, about a month ago. But I've been wanting to get it on here. February 26th, so less than a month. It's pretty recent. Well, yeah, a month. It's a month, February 26th. So yeah, so that's our big number.
That's a great big number.
There's only one thing I enjoy doing more than college admissions, and that's philanthropy.
Yeah.
And so I say if I hang it up one day, it's so I can do philanthropy. I'm not going to be able to give $1 billion away, but I'm trying to position myself so I can do a little here and a little there. Like I love to give money away to people. It's super, super, super fulfilling to me. And so when I hear that somebody uses their largesse to be this benevolent, the stuff that Mackenzie Scott is doing. I mean, Spelman's just been reining it in, because Spelman was founded in 1924. Oh, by the way, that's a school that I noticed got harder. I had a kid not get in Spelman that never seen a kid this strong not get in Spelman. But anyway, so 1924, so it's just now 2024. So, I used to be in fundraising. And when you're in fundraising, like you take advantage of those kinds of things. Like the 100th year, the 200th year. Those are times that, people will shake the trees. Anybody in your constituency, you're prepping for a big major gift for them on those major landmarks. And somebody's working it at Spelman, because man, have they had a lot of big gifts. I mean, it's transforming the school. Like Spelman is on a path. Like Wellesley and Smith are the two wealthiest women's colleges. And Spelman, I think, may be the third now. Right, wow. Just only behind. Oh yeah, they're They're getting there. They're not Smith or Wellesley yet, because that's hundreds of years and more bigger even. But they're really, really got some dollars coming in. So
Good
yeah,
for
I
'em.
find that stuff inspiring. All right, well, Vince, this article is I think an important one. You were the first one to send it into our group text, and then so many listeners sent it in. It's an opinion piece, and it's entitled "Elite College Admissions Have Turned Students into Brands." This is
Yeah.
also hot in the press. This is a guest essay that appeared March 31st, 2024. So Vince and I are sitting here recording April 1st. So this broke yesterday by Sarah Bernstein, who's a playwright and a writing coach and an essayist in Brooklyn. Do you want to talk about what your takeaways were from the article, and then we have a discussion about it?
Sure. So, I think Mark, the author, she did a great job just sort of laying out the different anxieties that take place when helping, supporting a student through the essay process. And she sort of starts out by talking about Ivy Day, which was last Thursday, and that's when I think it's 8 of the Ivy League comes out. Berkeley and Stanford and Michigan come out the next day. And I think one of the things that really is still a standout in the process is what students say about themselves and how they communicate who they are and what their value is. And I think one of the approaches that some consultants really stand behind, because in an age where we're Instagram ready, when we're TikTok ready, when Zimi is talking about branding you in such a way that you're easily digestible, you find students who are really trying to segment and communicate quickly and clearly what their message is. And she talks about this firm called Dallas Admissions. And she leads with this branding statement: each person is a complex, yet admissions officers have a small amount of time to spend learning about each prospective student. The smart student boils down key aspects of himself or herself into their personal brand and sells that to the college admissions officer. So what that can look like is you find students really zeroing in and segmenting, and perhaps not leaving a lot of space to experiment and to explore.
Yeah, let me read one thing from the article along those lines.
Sure.
In the world of branding, a word that appears again and again is consistency. If you're Charmin, that makes sense. People opening a roll of toilet paper do not want to be surprised. If you are a teenage human being, however, that is an unreasonable expectation. Changing one's interest, opinions, and presentation is a natural part of adolescence and an instructive one. I find that my students with scattershot resumes are often the most confident. They're not afraid to push back against suggestions that ring false and will insist on revising their essay until it actually feels like me. On the other hand, many of my most accomplished students are so quick to accept feedback that I am wary of offering it, lest I become one more adult trying to shape them into an admissions-worthy ideal. I understand that for parents, prioritizing exploration feel like a risky bet. Self-insight is hard to quantify and to communicate in a college application. When it comes to building a life, however, this kind of knowledge has more value than any accolade, and it cannot be generated through a brainstorming exercise or a 6-step personal branding course online. That hopefully gives people a sense of it. So do you agree with her, Vince, or disagree?
I think that in this article, she says that it's really important for colleges to see the person behind the brand, and if that takes place, then hopefully that process has been successful. I think one of the things about the article that was hard for me is that in a recent episode where you were talking about a particular student who had a very clear interest in an area, they're going to really look like the area that they're interested in. And I do believe that if you have students that have such a clear passion that their brand, the way that she would describe it, will come soaring through. And I think that's totally appropriate, because it will help that particular student really stand out in any pool, because both the personal and intellectual passions come together. I think what she's talking about is when perhaps the path is not authentic. And that's what I think is really problematic, is when a student doesn't necessarily know or doesn't want to commit, but they're sort of being like ramrodded through a particular path that begins to feel unnatural. And if asked to sort of explain it, they wouldn't be able to explain it. That would be the challenge, I think. I think that's what she's getting at.
I feel like that was part of it, but there's another thing I think she was getting at, and I think it's actually really important, which is it's not really normal to expect a 14 or 15 or 16-year-old to know what they're going to do the rest of their life. It's just not. Like, people change.
Right.
And if college counselors are out here telling people that you need to sort of pick your course. Now, I get it. The UK schools are different, how they're set up. Canadian schools are different, the way they focus so much on the college major, fit to major in their evaluative process. I get all that. But I thought it's a really important point, because there's a fine line between not having a chaotic application that's all over the place and I don't know who this kid is.
Right.
That doesn't do well in selective pools, unless it's even tough even applying undeclared, undecided, unless at least you come across multi-interested.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between that and making a kid feel like they need to know exactly what they're going to do and everything needs to be, crafted. And, I just get uncomfortable. A lot of people come to me, and I know to you, and they say things like, I need a passion project.
Yes.
The thing that impressed me about that kid I was telling you about earlier that got in Stanford and not Berkeley, she was doing high level, crazy, passionate stuff at age 11 because she wanted to do it.
Right.
Not because a parent or consultant said you need to have some passion project. Like I find there's a lot of counseling that's trying to force people to do things that they really don't care that much about in an attempt to make somebody look more spiky, pointy, angular, or well lopsided. Just the fact that there's 4 words alone for one thing. And I think it's important to start with who somebody naturally is, and everything needs to be authentic, but also a lot of kids don't know. Now that might impact where they apply on the list building piece.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what she said is a really, really important message. And I'll tell you something, probably one of the things that was really one of the most hard things for me to hear was a conversation I had this week with a newer client that listens to this podcast. And she was saying, in a very respectful way, she was like, I just don't know if I agree with everything you say. And I was like, well, what do I say? She's like, well, you know how you kind of need to have this theme and weave it throughout your whole application and know what you're going to want to do at like a super young age. Like, I didn't find out what I wanted to do till my sophomore year in college. And I'm like, well, I hope that's not what you're picking up from the podcast. And so I see both sides, but I tend to agree more with her side, which is there's too much. What's my sound bite? What's my personal brand? What's this that you can manufacture? Manufacture is too strong a word. Kids feeling pressured that they have to chart out this whole consistent course from the 10th grade on.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's more, if that's who you are, then let's go with that. But if that's not who you are, then let's not go with that. And there are schools that there's a lot of schools out there that pride themselves on undeclared as our biggest major. And also liberal arts and science schools can be great for that because they want you to come in and take the econ and the comp sci and the philosophy and then take the English class and the physics and the math and then, change your major as much as you want. Like we're developing interdisciplinary critical thinkers who can imbibe all types of different knowledge and use it to have a better understanding of the world and to think at a higher level. Maybe you need to go there versus a place like University of Texas, Austin, that makes it hard to switch majors. So like to me, instead of saying this is what you need to be, it's more like, let's start with who you are. And then let's try to match the schools for who you are. But I'm not naive. You heard me when I gave that example the other day when I was, like when there is a coherent message, it is a little bit, put it this way. When I get a sense that someone authentically cares about something and I don't see that a lot, it's not something every kid wants to be a doctor. Every kid wants to do comp sci, whatever. Doesn't mean you can't do comp sci, but come at it from a different angle or come at it, if that will, it's what I always say. Admission officers want what they don't have. So if you're sounding like everybody else, or if you're sounding like you have no idea what you want to do, that can work in certain applicant pools, but there's some other ones it doesn't. That's why you guys need to match the student up to the school. Maybe that's the bottom line. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I could hear your struggle with how to present this, because I don't think that we disagree. I do believe that part of our job is helping students to explore. And if a student says to me, I want to do business, I have that junior right now. And then when I asked him what finance was or accounting, he had no idea. And it was simply, I think I can make a lot of money doing that. Then we needed to press on deepening that commitment and knowledge and do some assessments to help the student figure out if that really is a passion. Because I find a lot of the process is built around school names and less about sometimes the fit part is not even a question, because they just assume if it's a certain school, they're going to fit in without real much thought about what am I going to do when I get there and why am I really interested in that place. So I find that a lot about some of the branding I've found in terms of helping students figure out what their passions are is part of what my job is to help them discover those different things. And if at the end of junior year they're still undecided, what are some things that we've discovered so we can talk about those?
Yeah, it's so much nuance here because I feel like it's my job to help them to explore their interests, find the intersection between their interests and their gifts. But I also know that kids change and people change. And I am concerned with this fact that it almost feels like we're not letting kids be kids anymore. We're not letting them just grow up and go through natural progression. Friends, this concludes the first part of my discussion with Vince about a wide range of issues, and particularly whether students should be branding themselves to colleges. I hope you join us next week for the final part.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Julia. Jennifer from Texas has a doozy of a question.
Hi, this is Jennifer from Texas. Thank you for your invaluable podcast. I can't overstate how much it has helped us begin our college search for our student this year. My question centers on how to put concerning information about a college into proper perspective and obtain more information about it. My student and I recently toured a small private liberal arts college, and as we usually do, we picked up a student newspaper while there. We were dismayed to read on the front page an article about multiple acts of racism on campus in the past 2 years, including a noose being hung in a dorm bathroom, racial slurs written on whiteboards, an employee of color's tire cut in the parking lot, and most recently, several male students calling some female students the N-word. And worse, a dean of this college accused a professor of inciting racial tension for raising this recent event in the professor's Race and Ethnic Politics in the United States course. The number of such incidents is concerning enough for us to cross this college off of our list, but I want to ensure I'm putting this into proper perspective. This is a college that does have a DEI department, and I would have considered it for a younger child too. What are the best ways to gauge if this is a few bad apples and the university is properly handling such incidents, or if this is really the pervasive culture at this college? Should we ask an admissions officer about these issues? Thank you for any advice.
Julia, take it away. What are your thoughts?
This is a great question, Jennifer. And I also applaud you for being so observant along with your children about this. I actually really encourage my students when they go to visit a campus to pick up the student newspaper.
Yep.
Now, as someone who works at a high school with 2 student newspapers, I do know they're not perfect forms of journalism, right? So, sometimes there might be a little sensational news or not fully accurate. However, I find most of the time the student newspaper really is the pulse of the school. This is also a deeply personal question and experience, especially as Milton Academy is a predominantly white institution. For my students I work with who are BIPOC, this is a large conversation we have. And while I would love for you to be able to ask the admission officer, is there racial discord on campus? What are the biggest issues? What are students talking about? How has the administration handled issues of racism or other isms? I find it's hard to find a really good, honest answer from an admission officer. Shout out to some of my favorites, Tina Elfenbein over at Grinnell, who will always be honest. But I would do the same when I was an admission officer. I would give sort of I wouldn't lie, but I wouldn't give, I wouldn't say the ugliest of ugly things.
Yeah, let me stop you for a sec there, Julia. Like the reality is you could get seriously in trouble if you just let's say you have a big racial issue. And if your job is recruitment. And so if you say we have a real massive problem in that area, you may be getting called into a meeting that may not be good. So it's just, I don't think the admission officer is the best person to go to in this case, because it's just a bit of a conflict of interest between what their job is and what you're actually asking them.
Right. And also this, so I've said this to our listeners a lot. I did multicultural recruitment my entire time in admissions. I walk down the street being read as a white person all the time. So as much as I talked to all the BIPOC students all the time at Haverford and heard what they were experiencing and feeling, it was also not my experience, right? So I do think actually the student newspaper is a good gauge. And I would think that should be a criterion that you're considering, is that if you're hearing multiple voices that are saying, we've got a problem with race, or we've got a problem with something else on campus. And I will be honest with you, I think every college, right, that nearly every college we talk about is a predominantly white or historically white institution. And so they're all not going to be perfect, right? They're all going to have these problems. It really depends on your comfort level and your safety level if that problem reaches a level that you don't feel safe or supported by the administration. And so I actually, for Jennifer, I would have your kids listen, and whatever that gut feeling is and your feeling is that it's great that you've really investigated it. You clearly haven't taken it at face value. So I would also say that to other people who might have, for example, when I worked at Haverford, we had it was really upsetting, but we had a student, it was super rare. We had a student who had told the police she had been sort of assaulted by a stranger who'd walked onto the campus. that ended up not being true. And that's very rare. I just want to put that out there. It's super rare for there to be a false accusation, but it was in the student newspaper. And so many prospective families, before we knew that this assault hadn't occurred, were very worried about sending their children to a campus that was pretty open in a suburban area where someone might come off and it wasn't fully safe, or might come onto campus and it wasn't fully safe. So good that you're investigating it and just getting a couple other sort of sources here. But I would say that most admission offices might also have tour guides that you can talk to or connect with. While they are often paid by the admission office, I do find that because they're peers with your students, that they often are pretty honest, or a lot of the time they will say, hey, I'm also a student of color. I'm also of this identity. And these are the things that have been really hard for me. And these are the things that I think the college is doing well on. And it's really up to you to decide if that's enough work for you. But I think choosing a college and the community and its values and how it makes people feel safe and that they belong is a paramount thing when choosing your college. So if you are hearing from a lot of different sources, or even two, reputable vetted sources, that there's some kind of issue that's really concerning for you, I would really listen to that.
Yeah, and like Julia, I did a multicultural recruitment all 9 years. I did admissions as well. And I have lots of thoughts on this. One is, I do want to say what Julia said, like no place is going to be perfect. And occasionally I have someone who comes to me and wants to rule out a school because of one incident. And it's the kind of thing I know happens everywhere. And I do need to let them know, like, you're not going to get utopia. However, this was an extreme, what you shared. Like, this was a lot of different things that were an extreme. Right. So this is concerning. And also the fact that one professor was talking about it in school like that speaks to me, to his concern on the culture. By the way, he'd be a great person to reach out to, the person that was bringing it up, because a lot of times professors have tenure. They can be completely free. I agree with Julia. Students are just students. They're just going to keep it real. Like, they may get a little $10 an hour or something, but that's not going to constrain them. Now, I wouldn't ask a student in front of a group.
Yes, agreed.
Example, I toured Clemson in July. And Clemson is a very overwhelmingly white school. Like, you do not see a lot of diversity when you're on that campus. But I had a black tour guide. And so I intentionally stayed behind afterward to ask her, like, what's the experience like for people of color? Like, there's not a lot of people around here that look like you. And so we had a really good, candid conversation. And it was a conversation that I would not, she would not have had in front of everybody. So I find students can be great. Like, you guys have probably heard me say, I love nothing more than planting myself down on a campus and just talking to students. And I encourage you to find people that are like you. So if you're a person of color, talk to the people of color. If you're an engineering major, try to talk to engineering majors, or whatever, however you self-identify. So also, a lot of times schools have Department of Multicultural Affairs, like those. That's the kind of place that would be good to go talk to rather than the admission officer. Seeking out that professor. I do agree that when there are incidents, you want to know how is it handled.
Yes.
Now, I'm not going to mention the name of a school here because I don't want to throw them under the bus. But in our very first year of the podcast, 2018, a listener read some very, very disturbing things that had to do with like a date rape in the school newspaper. And they reached out to me because they're like, thank you so much for your idea about reading newspapers. And so there were stories and stories and stories on this particular, kept running. So this is one of the most selective schools in New England. So when they visited the school, they made a point of talking to school leadership about the incident. And they did not like the answer they heard, and they took it off the list.
There you go.
Yeah. So it is really important to find out when things happen, how are they dealt with? It's extremely important to find out how they're dealt with. Now you want to be careful here because you can get into the rumor mill, but like parent Facebook groups for colleges.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah.
Like there's just a lot of sources that are out there Like you gotta kind of be a little bit of a detective if you haven't said, I'm done with this place, it's over. Like, if it's one of these places where you're like, I'm assuming the fact that you're asking this question makes you wonder, are you judging prematurely? You even said you have a second student, maybe, who knows? Like, I don't think you would be asking if you were convinced, like, absolutely no way in any circumstance, could this place ever be right? You actually asked, am I overreacting? So, you want to get multiple perspectives and you want to find out how it's being dealt with.
Yep.
And if a place is not safe, just move on, because people think of safety from a standpoint of, am I going to get mugged, stabbed, or shot? But there's such a thing as emotional safety. And nobody needs to be tormented for who they are and to be made to feel less than and ridiculed. Like, I know incidents like this happen, but honestly, all the things you described, I would have been out if I heard everything you told me. No way. That was just too many things. And really severe things. The tires, the N-word with the students, the writing in the wall. Like, that was just too... And then it does concern me, what happened with the professor, because to me, that's a professor saying, we have a problem here. And then the way that was dealt with.
Right. So that's clearly a value of the administration and by extension of the mission statement of the college. And if you don't fit with the mission statement or the values of the college, then it's not going to be a good fit overall.
The only thing that I will say, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form defending this in the slightest, not one scintilla, but it's really hard right now on campuses because we're so divided as a country. And people come usually from echo chambers where they're surrounded by people that think like them, believe like them, have their thoughts, and then they get thrown into a dorm room with someone totally different and living across the hall. And I'm going all the way, and this has been going on for a while. I remember it's probably about 2017. I was having a meeting with somebody who's over like multicultural affairs at a boarding school. And I was meeting with them in Atlanta. We had lunch. And she was telling me, our headmaster is just throwing up his arms. He doesn't know what to do. He said he came back from a headmaster's conference. And nobody knows how to handle this because, it's tough. It's just tough out there. It's really, really hard trying to strike the balance between, free speech and intolerant conduct. Like, that is not easy. It might seem easy because maybe in your eyes you might know what your line is, but that is not easy. And so this particular person was telling me that all of the headmasters are just throwing up their arms like, we don't know how to deal with it. And I'll tell you, I took 12 students when I was at KIPP, Director of College Counseling at KIPP, I took 12 students to Emory. And there were massive protests that were going on at the time because what happened was somebody took graffiti or spray paint and put a big MAGA sign on a building. And then a bunch of students were demanding that person be expelled because they were saying, I don't feel safe here.
Right.
And the school was addressing it, but they didn't feel like expulsion was the correct answer. And so striking the line between, well, you're not creating a space for me that feels safe versus these are just really, really hard questions.
They are.
They're really difficult. And there's a lot of stuff's going on. The same with, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Schools are struggling with that. They're struggling with this. And we're in an environment right now where people are much more brazen. And look at the level of just anti-Semitic incidents that are happening, and then you have the anti-Muslim incidents, and then you have the anti-Asian and the anti-Black. And it just feels like people feel more emboldened to spew their hate than ever before with impunity. And so, the views of society come into the colleges. Because colleges are also trying to create this learning laboratory and bringing everybody together, but it's not always copacetic, and it's really hard. I'm not excusing this. I'm just saying that it's hard. is hard, and colleges are all wrestling with this to some extent. And Julia, you and I see it in the college-specific questions they ask. So many
Yes, all the time.
schools ask questions you can tell they're trying to suss out, are you somebody that can work across differences in a unified way? And they're trying to use their questions to suss out that, because they're looking for more kids like that on campus, and they're trying to use their questions to identify who's got the right set of personal qualities that we need here.
Yep.
So, but my bottom line is, I think you should trust your gut and your instinct, and I think your instinct told you to move on. You already told me enough that I would have bounced a long time ago if I saw that many incidents, and I know both of my kids would have too. So, trust your instincts. Yeah.
Agreed.
Great question. Thanks for writing in.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 2 of my interview with Lydia Dagenet and Julia on law school admissions, Lydia lets us know if students can get access to LSAC. Lydia talks about what role writing ability and critical thinking plays in the admission process. Lydia talks about the content of the first year in law school. Lydia talks about whether you need to go to a top-tier law school to get the plum jobs after graduation. Lydia answers the question, are there too many lawyers out there? Is the field oversaturated? Lydia tells us what the character and fitness questions are, and she tells us why they are so important. Finally, Lydia goes on the hot seat. Listen and enjoy. Is there anything students can do, like in undergrad, to tap into all the LSAC resources? Is that something that's just, protected for admission officers, or is there a way of tapping in, because it looks like they've got voluminous amounts of information?
Yeah. Two things. One, yes, LSAC does have some public data available. If you go to their website, there's a whole section for data analytics. And so anyone can have access to that. You won't get the full reports that every law school can get. But you can get quite a bit. That could be helpful. The other thing is, if your school, most schools have some kind of pre-law advisor. Sometimes that might be a political science professor who's doing it, or it might be an alum, or it might be through the career services office. Technically, whomever is named a pre-law advisor at a university can ask for and get access to the LSAC's pre-law advisor section and library. And so there is an additional layer of information that is available to pre-law advisors specifically. And it gives them data about their specific school. So that is one way actually that you can kind of see, where do I fall within my class, depending on if that pre-law advisor shares that information with their students, which, that's up to them. But I would say the other thing is talk to the law school admissions professionals. There are all kinds of conferences. LSAC has, they do giant law school fairs in a lot of cities, and they did develop a virtual fair during the pandemic, which they also still have. And, remember that law school admissions professionals, they come from all different walks of life. Some of them are lawyers who have that legal background and were much more interested in higher education and admissions and that kind of thing than practicing law. Some folks are like me. They came from a different part of the education world. But I do think, as much as they do want you to go to their law school, they're also just trying to help students have access to law school. That is a major goal of the profession. And they have a great amount of information. And all of these reports that I was telling you about, back when I would give information sessions at my law school or to groups of visiting students who might be coming from an undergrad school to see my law school, I put it up there on a projector. I'd cross out all the names and school names and things like that. But I would tell them exactly, hey, this is what we look at. And this is how you're going to be looked at. And this is where you can do these different things. And so I think, just talking to those folks, they're a huge wealth of information. And they're oftentimes going to be your best advocate, I think, in the process.
I know I have one more law school question, and then I don't know if Julia has any more, but two quick anecdotes, and then kind of a follow-up on these anecdotes. So when I was at Westtown, I used to do like a career night for the multicultural group that I worked with. And what we did was we had maybe 20 different professions, and we tapped into people in the community. and we'd have 1 to 3 people on a panel, and students would go and pick what professions they were interested in. So we're always going to do one on lawyers and doctors and dentists and computer science and journalists and, all the big ones you would think of. And so one of the things that the lawyers would consistently say on the panel is, if you want to be a lawyer, become a very good writer because you're going to write a lot. Mm-hmm. So I'll ask both questions at once. So one of my questions is the role that writing plays in the evaluation. And then a second anecdote, I used to take students on a civil rights trip to Birmingham, and then we'd go to see an actual court case there, and then we'd have a meeting with a judge. And I remember this one time, the judge said, he's like, I love my job because you know what? My job is 4 things. He said, I read, I think, I write, and I speak. And that's what I do all day. I read, I think, I write, and I speak. So that gets me thinking, what role does critical thinking play, or your assessment of someone's critical thinking? So you also have the reading and the writing, right? Both of them mm-hmm. kind of mention writing. So basically the question is, what role does somebody's writing and your perception of their critical thinking play in the evaluation?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And it is definitely a central piece of what is looked at, because that is what you are doing day in, day out of law school and in practice. Because the application can't really test your reading, that's why it's looking at your writing. If there were a grade, and of course the LSAT tries to get at your reading analysis, that exactly. But yes, it is important to be a clear writer and communicator. And again, I emphasize the word clear. Just as some students kind of get a little bit, they kind of go off on a tangent sometimes with their college essay writing, and they might get pretty creative. And I think that there's a certain amount of tolerance for that in undergraduate admissions. Law school admissions, again, lawyers reading your application, they're not necessarily looking for the warm and fuzzies, although that's certainly fine. But, don't get too creative. They really want to see that you know how to write, how to express yourself. And if you go kind of too far out there, it becomes a lot more difficult to make that assessment. And when you get into law school, you have to read an incredible amount of information. You have to learn how to report back that information. And if you don't have glasses going into law school, you'll have them by the time you graduate. But one of the things, though, I will say that I was very surprised at. I had a great professor that I worked with on the admissions committee. She was a contracts professor, and this is one of your mandatory first year classes, which, by the way, the first year of law school, the content is virtually the same anywhere you go. Okay. You have to take these foundational areas like criminal law, like contract law, to be able to move on and learn more things about the legal field. So that's something that is pretty universal. But this contracts professor, I was really curious about exactly what you asked about the writing, because coming from a liberal arts background, I care a lot about writing. I'm looking for an essay that is well written, that uses proper grammar, all of those kinds of things. And so what she did is she gave me 3 exams, and she showed me, okay, this is an A exam, this is a B exam, this is a C exam. And the C exam was pretty obvious. It was, they were not going into detail. The writing was not very good. They couldn't, fully develop their ideas. But the differences between the B exam and the A exam, the B exam was much better written. They had complete sentences and thoughts and everything, but they did not hit every single point that she was looking for, because these contracts exams were about throwing everything on the page, proving that you knew everything. And she didn't mind, and law professors don't always mind, if you don't say it beautifully, you just have to put it on the page. And the A exam was a mess. It's, didn't always have capitalization. There were parenthetical remarks that never got closed. It was not what I would call, really strong and fluid writing. But for that timed exam, they put everything on the page. They showed what they knew. It was, you could follow it. You could navigate your way through it, even though it wasn't, there wasn't a nice intro and conclusion to all of their examples. It doesn't matter. That isn't necessarily what gets you the A in law school. But of course, by the time you graduate, you do need to be able to write well. You do have to, there's certain formatting that you have to follow when you're writing a legal memo. So you do, and grammar matters quite a bit actually, because, as we know, a comma can change the entire meaning of a sentence. So there is very close attention to that, but it is not the end all be all. And in fact, law schools, they take great pride in taking whatever writing that you have learned and helping you write like a lawyer, just like they help you think like a lawyer. Another thing I'll add, because I think the other misconception that I hear from students a lot is that they think they need to be an argumentative person to be a good lawyer. That is not true. Certainly, those, if you're that kid at the dinner table who's always talking back and asking questions, yeah, that could be a sign that law is in your future. But lawyers are advocates first and foremost, and you do not have to do all your advocacy just through speaking. A lot of lawyers do, they'll never set foot in a courtroom, for example. They're doing contract law, they're negotiating contracts, they're laying the groundwork for different cases, and their advocacy comes through their writing. So yes, there is a lot of writing, regardless of what you do in law. There can be a lot of speaking, particularly if you go into litigation and you're more of one of those courtroom lawyers. But in law school, you can, you can write for journals in law school. You can be on a mock trial team. You are going to develop those different skills in different ways. And, but yes, you're going to need to be able to construct arguments well. And a lot of that comes down to your writing.
Well, you know me, I thought of a couple more things, so I should have never, ever said this is my last question. Something should never come out of my mouth. This one surprised Julia, but when I was in grad school, I remember being in a really small class, really small, maybe 10, 12. And I remember one time the professor's like, "You again?" My hand would pop up all the time. But so certainly on the East Coast, there is really a perception of how hierarchical law school is, like the law school you go to. And I've had many a person say to me, like, certain corporate firms will only recruit from certain like top 20 ranked schools. And friends, back when Karis was in kindergarten and at Westtown School, there was a parent who was an attorney, and we'd have these gatherings together. It was a really small group. There's only 15 pre-K students and like 18 kindergarten students in the whole entire school. And so we'd have all these, how they are, the birthdays and the get-togethers, and you kind of get to know each other when it's a community that's small. So I was very active, involved at that time and volunteering, and I actually started working a few months after that. But there's this parent, she's an attorney, and she used to always pepper me with college admissions questions, constantly asking me about Westtown's college list and where kids are going to school all the time. And like, she asked me more questions than anybody else combined. They knew that I did this work. And at one point I said, "Your son is in kindergarten. Like, why are you so focused on college?" And she says to me, she quit back. She said, "You have to understand. I work at a law firm that if you don't graduate from one of the top 20 law schools, our firm isn't hiring you." And she felt very strongly, had she not gone to Georgetown, she wouldn't have got that opportunity. So that is something that can be a reality in certain corporate law jobs. Also, I find in college counseling, I find the families I work with that are oftentimes the most brand conscious are people in financial services and the law field. And I think that's because those professions seem that way, that, if that's how they operate, then it's a really big deal that my student goes to what's perceived as top tier. Do you feel that is an East Coast versus a Midwest thing, or do you feel that's also true in the Midwest? That's my first question.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of truth to that. I think, you look at the Supreme Court justices.
Sure. Narrow list.
Yeah. Or look at, the folks who clerk for the Supreme Court justices. So yeah, if there are certain pathways that you want to take, if you want to give yourself the best run at that, then yeah, you best be getting yourself to, we call them the T14, the top 14 law schools, or really the T3s in that particular case. And yeah, absolutely. At those giant corporate law firms, their clientele, because their clientele, I think, expects that you've gone to a particular brand name of law school. That is the expectation. Now here in Kansas City, our top law firms, our big national law firms, you're going to see a good proportion of some top brand name law schools, but you're absolutely going to see UMKC on there. You're going to see Mizzou, KU. You're going to see Washburn. You're going to see all of these local law schools, and that's because they interview our students. They, know how good they are, what they've learned. Those students are making those network connections while they're here. So, it is more, for many law firms. In fact, again, for most law firms in the country, they're looking for more than just the name of that law school. But again, it is also true that there is a hierarchy to the jobs that you get coming out of law school. So if you're in the top 10% of the class, great. You can get recruited by one of those big firms. If you're outside the top 10%, you need to be rethinking where you want to work, because those top 10s or those top law firms are not oftentimes looking very far beyond the top 10% of the class, and in fact have requirements for the resumes that they will review. So that is an unfortunate reality of law school. And some advice that I will give you now is that your first year, your 1L GPA is foundational, because you are applying for summer associateships after your first year of law school, and they are looking at where you fall in that law school class. And that's the reality of it. I wish it weren't so cut and dried, but it in many cases is. But like we also say, C's get degrees. So,
I thought it was D meant degree.
Yeah. Well, and it's so funny. I've been on panels with lawyers and judges before where they will joke that the students who got C's in law school have the most lucrative law jobs, because they went and they did it. They founded their own firm and they did their own thing and were wildly successful. And usually it was, I think they said that the A's were the judges usually, which, makes some sense. But there's space for everyone. But yeah, their law school still is a very, or the legal field, the legal profession is still a very hierarchical kind of place, and a thing to go into. And you also have to think about your lifestyle too. Like you're really, for any of those top, whether it's finance or business or
90 hours a week, all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you're fixing all the parking tickets for all the lawyers in your firm too.
So here's what I believe is my last question. I hear mixed things about the profession from a standpoint of the demand. Like I've heard people say, there's too many lawyers out there. There's just too many now. And then other people still feel like it's a totally viable path. We need more. Do you have a sense of kind of the demand and the supply and the ratio and all of that? Like, we all kind of know there's a shortage in certain things, right? Whether it's IT professionals or nurses or certain things, cybersecurity. What is your thought on, there's too many lawyers out there and we probably need to close some law schools down because there's too many, versus, that's like, we need way more. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's tough. When I was working in law school, it was coming right off of a big boom of lawyers, of newly minted lawyers who then could not find jobs, partly because of the recession and partly because lawyers never retire. They die, and that's how they retire. So, sorry, but that's true. But, and so that was kind of creating a double, problem on both ends. And the market always reacts to that. And so then what happened was, okay, there was this oversupply of lawyers. Then all of a sudden law school applications went way down. And 3 years later, we had the problem of, are there enough lawyers. So it really, it kind of corrects itself and it ebbs and flows. Something that the law school dean when I was at UMKC always talked about is there's always a need for lawyers in some capacity because there are always people who need help. I mean, if you think about the number of people who need legal assistance and who maybe don't know that they can seek it out or that they could afford it. Now, again, affordability is another question, but there's a huge problem still with access to lawyers. And so in that sense, no, the legal profession hasn't really fulfilled its full duty. But most of the time when students go to law school, they graduate, they have debt, they need to get a good paying job. And so not every lawyer wants to take the pay that it would take to be able to do these kinds of access jobs, to work for legal aid, to, do the really important work that public defenders do, because it isn't lucrative. It's not flashy, but it's incredibly needed. So, so I would answer that question to say, sure, at the top end, do we need more lawyers? I don't know. We always need good lawyers. I wish that we could pay our public defenders more and give them lesser caseloads. I wish that we could invest more in legal aid. I wish that we could help. UMKC used to run this great expungement clinic where people could come in and they couldn't get jobs, they couldn't get apartments because they had something on their record that they just couldn't get fixed. And it just takes a lawyer a couple hours of work to get that off of there and to completely change somebody's life. And so I'm glad that these clinics exist, these legal clinics that law students can get involved in. As long as they have a supervisor, they can practice law in some minimal capacities. But that's where we need more. And I don't know how to fix that problem, but there's just an imbalance, I think, in the field of law.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, I'm very excited about our recommended resource today, and it's so appropriate to have it on this episode. Kevin Newton has started his own podcast. And of course, it's called An Education Abroad. And the subtitle is Helping Americans Earn Degrees Overseas. And he's just unlaunched his first episode. And guess who's on? Julia Esquivel, of course. So many of our podcast co-hosts all together. But for those of you really interested in learning more about going overseas, this is a podcast that's going to specialize in it. Kevin Newton's An Education Abroad. His first episode, it's all about Kevin, his background. His second episode, St. Andrews. So we hope you'll check this out to get more knowledge of going to school overseas. Thanks, Kevin. Really appreciate it. And you'll hear more of Kevin in our College Spotlight. Lydia, this has been awesome. Have you said everything you want to say? Is there anything that you kind of feel that you haven't said that you want to share?
The only little kind of hot tip that I wrote down that I thought I should share, because not a lot of people think about this until they're applying to law school, is that the one thing that is very different on your law school applications that you cannot avoid is that there is a section of questions that are very personal and invasive. They're called character and fitness. And that is because in order to even have permission to sit for the bar exam, you have to be declared fit by your state bar to be a lawyer, that you have good character, that you, are going to be somebody that can be trusted with this license to practice law. And that starts with law school. And there's a whole section on the application. Law schools can word these questions however they want to. Some are very specific, some are very vague. But oftentimes modeled after their state bar exams that will ask you, have you ever been arrested? Have you ever been suspended? Have you ever been on academic probation? Have you ever had a license for anything revoked? And the important thing is be honest and be thorough and show some remorse when you're answering these questions if you have anything to declare. Because when you're applying to law school, a lot can kind of be forgiven. But if there's something that you've done that you don't declare that they find out about later, that can be a real problem for you ever being able to practice law. And this actually includes juvenile things. So sometimes somebody might have something on a juvenile record that they have been told is sealed. It's sealed in every instance of your life except if you are applying to law school or to be a lawyer. And that's because they will unseal it to look at that. So when in doubt, ask questions, ask your admission officer. I've seen people with some pretty major things on their record be okay because they were very forthright about it. And I've seen other people with things that one might consider minor, like they were on academic probation from their university and didn't report it. Well, that's seen as being dishonest in their application, and that's a big deal. So so that's I would joke with people when I would give information sessions, if you have broken the law, like no more breaking the law from this point forward. Okay. Stop it. Follow the law if you want to be a lawyer. And it's, it's true. Like it's okay if you speed, but there are things that you kind of can't come back from. So, you need to love the law if you want to be a lawyer.
That's a great one to end on. But you're not getting out of here without going on the hot seat. We call it the lightning round.
Yeah.
Are you ready for the lightning round?
I guess so. I think so.
All right. We'll start easy on you. So what is your favorite kind of music?
Ooh, my favorite kind of music is the music that I listened to when I was a high school student. That's my favorite kind of music. A lot of no new music. No, I mean, I like some new music, but definitely the ones that I always go back to are things that I loved in high school. A lot of alternative rock. Weezer is a favorite for sure.
Julia told me, ask her a Weezer question.
Yes.
And everyone knows I'm clueless about pop culture. So I said, what's Weezer? Didn't know what
they
Weezer
still
was.
have lots of new
Never
music, but they definitely rose to fame when I was in
Do you have a favorite Weezer song?
Too many to name. That's too hard. Although their first album, I think, is my favorite. So
too hard.
Yeah.
All right. What is your pet peeve when you're driving? The thing that just grinds your gears?
People not using their turn signals drives me crazy.
Oh.
I'm a big rule follower. I'm a big turn signal user. And so when people don't do that, I get annoyed.
It's pretty dangerous, especially if they're in front of you and they're cutting over.
Right. Exactly.
What is the biggest purchase that you made that you regret?
Oh, gosh, that I regret. Oh, man, that is a really hard question. I am the kind of person who will do so much research before I buy anything. I will think about it for like a year, especially if it's a big purchase. So I usually do not have regrets when I buy something. Yeah.
No lemon car in your background?
No. And I mean, the car that I drive, I have had now it's as old as my son. So it's 12 years old now. And yeah. So I'm a pretty good consumer.
Awesome. What's a book you've read that you recommend our listeners read?
Oh my goodness. That's a hard question. I don't I have a very particular taste, and so I'm very careful about ever recommending anything to anyone, especially a very wide audience. So I would say the things that I feel comfortable recommending are probably oh my God, I don't have a good answer for this. I'm trying to think of the things that I read most often.
It's just the part. The interview's the easy part.
Yeah, I just read the news. I read the New Yorker. Ooh, I would say this. And I love this. There's a teacher here who teaches a class sometimes on the New Yorker. And if you want to be a good fluid writer, read really good fluid writing. And I think the New Yorker is a great source of that. So
cool. What is on your bucket list? Place you haven't been that you need to get to before you leave the planet?
Oh, gosh. Off the top of my head, I would say I would love to go to Japan.
And why? Why Japan?
Yeah, well, my family way back is from Japan. Both of my great grandmothers were picture brides who came to Hawaii from Japan. to get married to people that they had never met.
Wow.
And no, I would love to go to Japan. I'm a big Hello Kitty fan, and so I would just really go to town, I feel like, on my shopping and my purchases and all of that.
And connecting with your roots.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it would be amazing. So someday.
Awesome. Last question. What's your best advice for a student or a parent listening to this?
Oh, my best advice is run your own race.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be concerned about what your neighbor did, even what your older kid did. Use that information to inform you. But really, for every student out there, it is your thing. College is your thing. You've got to do it your way. There's not a right or wrong way to do that. You got to figure that out for yourself. Use the people around you to help guide you. But do it for yourself, and that's how you'll be happy. Like, that's the secret sauce, is like, you just want to be happy at the end of all of this, and you do that by doing it your way.
And you'll most likely be successful too, right? Because you're happy, and then you'll work harder and you'll enjoy it. It won't feel like work, and you'll be positive, and people will love your enthusiasm. So that's an awesome, awesome way to end. And Lydia, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. Julia, thank you for recommending Lydia,
And thank you so much, Lydia. This was so fun. I'm so glad we got to pick your brain and talk about you and embarrass you, and you got to impart your wonderful words of wisdom. But thank you so much for doing this interview with Mark and I.
Awesome. And I know we haven't had a college counselor confab meeting in a while. Lydia's in our group, but we're gonna crank it back up here pretty soon. So enjoy Kansas City, and when I get out there,
Chiefs.
Dinner's on me.
All right.
All right. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Lydia.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julia.
And now it's time for our college spotlight of the week.
Friends, hopefully you heard the first part of Kevin Newton helping break down University of Edinburgh. We'll now continue with the final part.
Starting this year in 2024, the personal statement and the letter of recommendation have become more of a series of short answer questions. So they're debating whether or not they're going to do it with the personal statement. I've seen it's kind of ebbed and flowed, but I feel the writing's on the wall. They want to be able to increase, I guess, access would be the word I would use, to make sure that you're providing in your personal statement exactly what's relevant. So there are questions of, why do you want to study this? Why do you want to study, what makes you feel qualified to study this? What other activities have you done that relate to this?
And that's generally, wouldn't you say, something you find quite a bit with U.S. and Canadian schools, like making the case for why you want to study what you want to study is a central part of the application.
Right. But I think that's where the similarities stop.
Okay.
Because, demonstrated interest it can be very helpful, and if you're applying to the Common App or to St. Andrews via the Common App, where you get that supplement to talk about St. Andrews, or you're applying someplace, it's not in Scotland, but Durham University, that does allow you to submit a secondary personal statement, or even Cambridge, which right now has the only mandatory supplement application or supplement to an application. Then those things become important because they just want to see, but it's nothing like, no one is having you write a University of Chicago essay here.
Sure.
And it's, again, I think what they found is they're, in the minds of a lot of European universities, especially in the UK, they've got mechanisms in place to increase student diversity from the UK. So if you go on the websites and you'll see what the typical offer is made at, you'll also see contextual offer mentioned. And it'll be either, typically they're listed in terms of A levels. So 3 A's to get it to study, law at Edinburgh, which is a very prestigious course. But if it's the contextual offer, might be an A and 2 B's or something like that. So that's where the UK government has identified postal codes that are disadvantaged for whatever reason.
So you haven't said anything about recommendations or extracurriculars. Are they non-factors or minor factors? And to even ask for them.
Recommendations important. Again, it's moving towards a they started it this past year, a series of 3 short answer questions that all should add up to 4,000 or so characters. The best part for anyone who's going to be writing one of these letters of recommendation, if you can even call it a letter anymore, is that for a lot of students, part B, or the second question, you can just put not applicable, because that's the one where you're talking about any special challenges that the student has faced. So, but again, for students who would benefit from that being discussed, it's a great place to do it. As for the extracurriculars, again, if it kind of matters to what you want to do, if you're interested in science, then being on Science Olympiad is going to matter more than being captain of your school's soccer team. Even if your school goes off and wins a state championship, that is of no real relevance. But if you were, came in second place in your city Science Olympiad, it shows that you care about your subject.
There are places in this country that are so selective and they're so holistic that I've lost my ability to predict who's getting in. They're just so selective that, I don't know what the institutional priority of the school is emphasizing in that given year. And then there's others that claim they're holistic, but they're so driven by numerical performance that it's really easy, to have a sense of if somebody is getting in. Now, you have to be careful with what you tell family you're working with, because last thing in the world you want to do is lead them on and then they don't get good news. It's just not good. But in your mind, you may be thinking high probability of admission. And,
Right.
you give a family a little bit of a clue, because I believe in having balanced lists. But would you say they're more like you're really able to tell sort of if someone's likely to get in, or are they like, just, man, this place is really hard because of all these other factors?
I think, it's the kind of thing that there's still surprises every day.
Sure.
And that's part of the fun and the challenge of the job, is that you're still going to have days that, you're just like, and the good news is, more often than not, it's someone getting in somewhere where you didn't necessarily expect them to. I have had a couple of students, and where it gets really difficult is when you're looking at Oxford or Cambridge. Someplace like St. Andrews or Edinburgh can differ by subject, but Oxford and Cambridge are the two that really, you feel that you've got a pretty good angle on how a student's going to perform, because with those institutions, in a lot of cases, not every case, but a lot of cases, you can measure everything up until the interview. So you have to do the interview prep and make sure you're squared away on that. But for the most part, you've got a better than average idea. And, it's something I think professionally makes my life a little easier, because I'll have a parent or a student who's interested in some place like Oxford or Cambridge or the London School of Economics, and I can point exactly to the data and be like, you don't have the scores, you don't have the grades, and this isn't going to save you.
You brought up an important point. Interview. I just completely neglected to ask you about that. For St. Andrews and Edinburgh, is there an interview component at all?
It depends on the subject, but they're quite rare. The places that Oxford and Cambridge will almost always interview, and Imperial College will typically interview. Other than that, most medical programs or veterinary medicine programs will interview. But if you're applying for, say, business management at some place, then typically there's not an interview. That's something to bear in mind, is the interviews are quite different than interviews here in the U.S., which, and again, you know this better than I do, so please feel free to correct me if I'm completely off base here. But, I was friends with someone who did the student interviews at William and Mary many moons ago. And she said that, part of their job was just to weed out the weirdos.
Yeah, we have completely different purposes to interviews here. So yeah, there are interviews that some schools use. They like to get juniors in early to drum up applications, and as part of moving people along the admissions funnel. There's others that are informational primarily. It's about rapport and being high touch. And then there's others that are quite evaluative. And the thing that's tricky is different people could do an evaluative interview. Like a senior fellow student could do an evaluative interview. You can't say, oh, I got an alumni, it's not an evaluative interview. No, it might be absolutely an evaluative interview. So interviews are a little tricky here in terms of how they're used. There's more than one purpose. It depends on the school. But let's get back to Edinburgh. So one thing you said that I think is really important for our listeners to understand, you talked about, it's a little more gracious admission standard, 3.3 GPA, but they still want 2.4s. And the reason why that's important is if you listen to a lot of information sessions in American schools, or even people I've had on this podcast, you can really get the impression, depending on who I'm interviewing, that your AP score is not much of a factor, if it's factored at all, into the evaluate. Like most oftentimes you'll hear people say, we care about the course because that's rigor, and we care about the grade because that's performance. Some of that has to do with the fact that nobody really sees 12th grade APs anyway because they're got long, Some of it has to do with other factors, like outside of school say to me that, things are over $100. Like for all we know, could have been a financial issue. We don't want it. We don't judge what we don't see. Right. And there's other schools here that are like, you're better off taking it. Once again, I hate to say that, but it's kind of like interviews. It's all over the place. But for a lot of the schools that you come on here and talk about, your AP scores carry more weight than they do at U.S. institutions.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of it is because the Edinburgh, St. Andrews, schools like that are kind of the exception. And we're seeing that a lot of British universities in particular are trying to move away from this as they gain more American applicants. But it's an objective way that they can measure how much of a subject a student's mastered. So if you take an honors chemistry class in, say, one part of the country and compare it to an honors chemistry class in another part of the country, that first honors chemistry class may go all the way up to and any chemist out there, I'm so sorry. I feel that everyone gets tired of me making history and language analogies here. May go all the way up to organic chemistry. You may start to understand nuclear decay, which are, some rather back of the book subjects. Other honors chemistry courses may end with stoichiometry because they're so focused on, explaining the atomic number, atomic weight, and how the periodic table works. So I think it's a way of demonstrating that, we have this measuring stick because we don't know what you're learning. And again, in the UK and in the French back and other European countries, it's standardized. If you're taking chemistry, you're learning these subjects. If you're taking a history course, you're learning these subjects. And, it kind of cracks me up that even in the confines of an A level in history, one of the things that British high school students can study if they elect to is American history. So, that it is focused more or less on what you want to, on their ability to kind of figure out, what have you actually learned? With something like history or English literature, ultimately it's the tool set you're acquiring and seeing if you can use it and put it to play. With something like chemistry or biology, I'm not sure, because those are the prereqs to study medicine, 5s on those for most British medical schools. I'm not sure if I want someone to be learning how to operate on me who may not know the difference between, say, a cell wall and a cell membrane, and understand that I don't have a whole bunch of cell walls as a human being. I may not want them wielding that scalpel anywhere near me.
Well, Kev, don't let me flip your flapjacks over there, but I am all questioned out, believe it or not.
Well, we need to write this down because that's not happened in a while.
It doesn't usually happen very often. Any parting final thoughts on Edinburgh before we call it a wrap?
I think, it's one of those places that if you want a more urban campus that feels that you're just as much learning from the city as you are learning from the university, it makes a lot of sense, especially, I think what we're seeing politically with Scotland's role in the UK, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I am certainly not an expert on Scottish politics, but what I keep reading is they may find themselves rejoining the EU at some point in the next 10 years, with or without the UK. They're quite upset about that. So stay tuned. And also Scotland, just Edinburgh has a lot of those. It's a 4-year degree, so you do get the chance to study other subjects if you're not completely sold on your field.
Thank you, as always, Kevin. I really appreciate you. You're a huge addition to our podcast staff, and we like to get you in at least every third month with another part of the world. So we'll see you back here in a few months.
Sounds great, Mark. Thanks again.
Oh, thank you. Okay, friends, I indicated last Monday that I'd be back to talk about the conference, but I really felt we needed to get Lisa's part 3 of our trilogy of how colleges make decisions in, because people are starting to make decisions now. So Lisa and I literally recorded it earlier today for around 45 minutes. We'll run that over the next 2 weeks. And Lisa's coming at how to select a college more from a mental health standpoint, a safety standpoint. So a little different from what Julia and Susan did, but it complements it very well. And then after that, we'll have the final part of Linda's interview with Marjorie Bentley. We know she's the executive director of the Stars College Network, and they'll be talking about what colleges are doing to recruit students from small town and rural locations. And friends, this is the time of year when seniors are making decisions. Juniors, sophomores, freshmen, parents, grandparents, you all may be facing some major decisions in your life, whatever, maybe related to relationships, job, career, money, health. I want to share something with you. I like to listen to books on tape as well as podcasts when I drive. And I was driving back from Raleigh to Spartanburg, South Carolina. And the gentleman I was listening to, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, he said something that I thought was pretty profound. He was talking about how busy it is out there, and busy, hustle, bustle, cell phones, TV, YouTube, internet, Instagram, and on, right? And he was talking about making major decisions. And what he said was this: take time to be alone by yourself and listen to your thoughts. Take time to be alone by yourself in a quiet place and listen to your thoughts. For me, that's going out into our backyard, looking at the woods and talking to God and just listening. But I encourage all of you to do the same. Take time to be by yourself in a quiet place and listen to your thoughts. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.